This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, I'm in Long Beach, California. Again, strangely enough, sitting in a space that I recorded a podcast with about 3 years ago with another brewer in this very same space here in Long Beach. My guest on the podcast is Ian McCall from ISM Brewing. Welcome to the podcast, Ian.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate that. Yeah, this is hallowed ground.
It's kind of a legendary place for beer, and interesting enough. So this is the former location of Beechwood Brewing, and now Ian, who was head brewer for a long time for Beechwood, and then went to RIP, and then now has launched ISM, has come back home to this location you brewed in for so many years for Beechwood, and it's such a cool kind of roundabout story. We will get into that kind of history and story, and of course, if anyone was paying attention, Ian and ISM this year, 2024 World Beer Cup, just back in April, won a gold medal for Western Standard Time. They're in the West Coast IPA category. So of course we're going to talk about West Coast IPA. We're on the West Coast. We're with award-winning West Coast IPA. I mean, you won another gold, for coffee.
Caffeine for coffee beer.
Yeah, and then a bronze medal also in Saison. So you're definitely spread out here in what you make for those beers. We're going to talk about that ISM approach, and we're going to see where the conversation goes. Before we do that, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer, but don't just take it from me.
This is Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery. We've been using G&D chillers from the beginning, and from our original 3.5 barrel pub system up to our production brewery. We've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high-quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support whenever we need it.
That's right. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring on your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is the industry partner that brewers trust to take their operations to the next level, especially when it comes to canning their product for distribution. By partnering with ProBrew, brewers can fill and seam their canned product. It ranges from 100 to 600 cans per minute. Their unique filling process also ensures low dissolved oxygen pickup and focuses on product quality during the entire process. For more information, visit probrew.com or email them at contactus@probrew.com. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, Old Orchard has supplied flavored craft juice concentrate blends to over 46 states for the production of fruit-forward beer, cider, seltzer, wine, spirits, and more. By partnering with some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape, Old Orchard has become a go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Right, Ian, we start off the podcast with a little bit of background. And again, yours is circuitous, but it actually forms a bit of a circle here in such a cool and interesting way that I think also underscores that kind of beautiful communal aspect and longstanding friendships and connections that underscore craft beer in the best possible way. Tell me the story. How'd you get started in brewing? What was your entree into craft beer? And, map that arc of your brewing career for us.
Yeah, it was, so I graduated high school in 2000. I spent a few years up in Northern California doing construction, and I really loved my time up there. I'm a huge fan of Northern California. My dad lives up there now, so getting to go back and visit him is always fun. But when I moved back down from Northern California in about 2004, I stumbled upon this small place called Brewbakers. And so for those who are not familiar with Brewbakers, it's a brew on premise. Unfortunately, we really don't see that many brew on premises around anymore. Kind of wish we would, because it's just a cool space. It was a fun space, a creative space. We had 6 15-gallon copper kettles where we could brew almost anything we wanted to. Now, I'm not going to say the beer was as good as the beer we're making today.
Sure.
But it was for me, as a 21, 22-year-old kid, it was a ton of fun. It was really amazing to see and learn and be a part of that process, and then to be able to share it with somebody else. So within the span of about 5 to 6 years there, I went from...
And so you were leading small groups also, brewing on premise and kind of helping them out and teaching them as they went too.
For sure. And so I was learning as they were learning.
Yeah.
I really dove in and learned as much as I could about beer at that point in time. And I was teaching them the basics as I knew them. But we would run, on a busy day, we had Thursday build a case or Thursday brew a case special. So you'd come in, you'd brew a full 15-gallon batch. 5 of those cases of beers we would keep in-house. So we had to make sure that the balance of the batch was good enough to serve. So it was very important. We couldn't it wasn't just a throwaway batch.
All right.
And that's what we got served for the next, few months in the store. But the customer would come back in and
extra dry hopping or the adjunct ingredients that they should add to this brew after it was done.
Yeah. It was just so cool. We'd go over running to Smart and Final. I want to add chocolate. Let's go to Smart and Final and get some Baker's chocolate or whatever it was. The sky was the limit. Especially when the customer wanted, they bought the entire batch. We could do anything we wanted to. So the creativity and the limits, the unlimited boundaries was just so much fun and opened my eyes to what craft beer could be. But during that time, I was introduced to Gabe Gordon and Lena, the owners of Beechwood. We had a bakery on premise, and Gabe reached out sometime early Beechwood days and needed potato buns and onion buns and pretzel rolls for his sandwiches. And so for a year or two, we made all those as well. Huh. So I remember there were some days I'd close the bar up at night and I'd go back early in the morning, make the bread and then deliver it to Beechwood in those early days in Seal Beach when Gabe had, I think it was 7 taps on the wall in the corner. And again, that was the next step in my beer experience where everything Beechwood did at that point in time and touched was gold. And the beer scene was really just starting to crank up. And what we know and celebrate as the beer scene back in those days kind of started in those small spaces like Beechwood or Hamilton's, the Toronados. And it was just
homebrew mart.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It was just, for my piece of the world, that was the spot. And, it's been countless nights back in there trying new beers. So long story short, I left Beechwood. I got out of beer for a bit, went back to college, went back to construction.
Left Brewbakers.
Yep. I was out of the beer industry.
Sure.
There was about 2 or 3 years when I went back to college, got a degree in something completely unrelated, comparative religion, which...
Something we have in common, as we talked about yesterday,
And when I graduated college, or graduated my BA, we had my celebration dinner at Beechwood. And it was that night that I found out that Gabe and Julian had partnered up and we're going to be opening up this Beechwood here in Long Beach. And so I immediately threw my hat into the ring. I wanted to get back into the beer game. It was either go back to beer, stay in construction, or possibly go to master's school and get a degree in comparative religion and be a professor for the rest of my life, which I liked the idea of being a professor, but I did not like the idea of going back to school.
Sure.
So yeah, ultimately I did get hired on here at Beechwood in 2011. My wife and I had just gotten married, returned from our honeymoon. I think it was July 4th. We returned 2011. I remember coming back to our friends, throwing a massive rager at our house, partied all night long with our friends who we hadn't seen in a few weeks because we were gone on our honeymoon, and then walked in here on July 5th to opening night. I'll never forget it. It's just a great series of events that really changed the direction of my life.
That's amazing.
And so Beechwood has just been this home for me for so long. And again, to be back in this space is so cool.
So then for Beechwood, you became head brewer and...
So I started behind the bar. There really wasn't at that point in time. Beechwood was so small.
Behind the bar.
Yeah, Jules.
What a great story.
Jules was back in he was in the brewery by himself. He was still working for, I'm going to get it right, I hope, Raytheon at that point in time. Right. And then working afternoon, evening shifts here. And I would watch and I said, man, I want to get back in there. I want to help out. I want to be a part of it. But there wasn't a space. And so in that in-between time, it was about a year and a half. I did the Siebel's online concise course. It was 18 weeks. Jumped into homebrewing, kind of worked on my homebrewing rig slowly until I finally got the opportunity to jump back in with Jules in 2013. which, coincidentally was the first year that Beechwood won Brewery of the Year. Was it? Yeah, Brewery of the Year at Great American Beer Festival.
Man.
and it just took off from there.
Sure.
I stayed on with Jules and Beechwood.
And Beechwood has become a medaling juggernaut.
Yes.
I think it's like 13 World Beer Cup medals, 22 GABF medals. I mean, it's pretty significant.
Absolutely. And I was just stoked to be a part of it. It really was just it was so super cool. I left here in 2018 as the lead brewer, overseeing production at the pub. By that time, Beechwood had already opened up their Huntington Beach production brewery as well. Taking over what was formerly Beach Cities. And so Julian was really focusing on production. I was focusing on the pub here. But I had this nag in the back of my head saying, can I really do this? Like, can I make a career out of this? And the next step for me was to figure that out, was to go from lead brewer where I was running production to a head brewer position where I really got a chance to run a brewery. And that's where I made the jump to RIP. Because they gave me an opportunity to step in as a head brewer, to run production, to build the brand. I mean, it was a real nice, small, local, hyper-local brand at that point in time.
Sure.
Doing some decent sales. If I remember correctly, they're putting out about 500 to 600 barrels a year, doing, I don't know, $500,000, $750,000 in revenue at that point in time. But it was an opportunity for me to really step in and see how far we could push it. And that's what we did.
Yeah. So what did you do there?
So I joined as the head brewer. One of the first things I did was within a few months, I brought on Danny Pretty, who's now their head brewer, took over my position when I left to come back here. And we really just dove into the recipes. We dove into making all the beers that were put out bangers. I mean, I didn't want somebody, the best compliment somebody could give me is to come in, taste through the majority of my beers, and they were all solid. I mean, not they're world class, not the best beer they've ever had.
Sure. But
they're all solid. And you've got a few standouts, but no dogs, right? It's always trying to avoid the dogs.
I mean, that's the strategy, right? How do you raise your average? You can raise your top line numbers, but once they're at a certain point, you can only raise them so much to increase your average. But if you pull up your bottom numbers, and there's nothing low, then that whole average definitely jumps up there.
Absolutely.
And I don't mean untapped average because screw that. But just thinking about this conceptually.
That's exactly the way I look at it. I want whoever's sitting on the other side of the bar to, if we have 6 West Coast IPAs on tap,
right?
I want them to be individual, to be unique, and to all be wow, right? There's no reason for me to put 2 West Coast IPAs on tap if they have a very similar hop structure or the same varietals in maybe a different combination. I want them to showcase unique individual hop growing regions, individual hop combinations, flavor profiles, all of that stuff super important to me. And so the other thing I did while I was there was to really hone in on collaboration. And maybe I'm a collaboration whore. I don't know. I'll accept that. That's totally fine. Yeah. But it's also part of building this community that I think is just so important. And it's even more important now.
For sure. And certainly garnered your own share of accolades at that time at RIP. And then ISM presented the next giant challenge. Like, could you go from a beer program to then owning and running your own business?
Yeah. I joke that every brewer out there lays in bed at night and dreams about owning their own brewery one day. And making.
Is this a dream or a nightmare?
It's both.
It is both. Okay, sure.
It's both. And so when this opportunity was presented to me, it was somewhat out of the blue. I wasn't expecting to be offered to take over and run the original Beechwood location and make it my own.
So they came to you and said, "Hey, we want to get out of this location and consolidate with our production.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what they were really looking forward to.
And they
doing
also
is
have the
consolidating
blendery
production.
right around the corner
Exactly.
here too. So they have a taproom presence.
And they've got multiple tap rooms. They've got Garden Grove and another one in Long Beach, and now their distillery in Bixby Knolls, which I'm sure Julian will talk about later. But yeah, I think for Beechwood, it was really about consolidating production, not having it split amongst two different breweries, being able to increase their production capacity there and focus solely on getting that beer out to all their tap rooms and to distribution.
So they said, hey, do you want to launch a brewery and put it in this Beechwood location here in Long Beach on the Promenade?
That's exactly what happened. Yeah. And then
it's not that often when somebody just comes to you and hey, do you want to, like, they're trying to find, and that's an interesting one rather than putting it out there on the open market and trying to, to find a buyer for it or whatever, like to come directly to you because, hey, feels like you would be the right steward for this.
I sure hope so. And that's my goal.
Sure. So then you scrambled.
So,
you're like, okay, what are we going to do?
Yeah, my wife and I, we had multiple meetings and multiple conversations and like, all right, are we going to do this? And ultimately, we took that leap of faith. We took that jump and we are now deep. We're all the way in.
All right, so you're all the way in. You're here in this familiar place. This place that also has a history of people. They just know the location, even if they're not giant craft beer nerds. Like they know there's a brewery there, and maybe I've been in there, had some food or had a beer, or whatever. Like it's just part of the the landscape here. So at least there's some traffic already potentially. And again, you have a kitchen here, and you serve food just as Beechwood did before. But you had to come up with and then. Should also say like there's an expectation for a fairly wide range of styles because it's a pub. It's not just a tap room. It's not people aren't just coming here to sample beers and and then buy them someplace else. Like they are here to also consume and drink and share with friends. And so as you started thinking about what that ISM brand and the beer program was going to look like for you, there's elements of continuity and then there's elements of divergence. How did you start creatively balancing those two things?
I think about the beer program like I think about the food program, like I think about the pub in general. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. It's got to be community driven, from the art on our walls to the styles that we brew. I want them to be indicative of what's happening down here in downtown Long Beach. I want them to be driven by the community. Now, I mean, they're also driven by mine and Gene's creativity, and styles we want to brew, yeast strains we want to play around with, and then what works within our production schedule. But ultimately, if we're not brewing beers or making food that this community in downtown Long Beach wants, we're not going to be around for very long. And so it's really, I mentioned pub, and it comes to mind over and over and over again. The pub of old kind of went away and gave space for tap rooms to evolve and grow. And I really think we're going back to a bit more of a pub model that's community based, community focused, where it's about not only your local community, but it's a gathering place where everybody can get together and celebrate the highs, the lows, the goods, the bads, the birthdays, the anniversaries. And that's what we want to be.
That requires beer styles that can be enjoyed in larger quantities.
Yes.
So potentially lower ABV. It kind of drives some of the kind of creative approach there. Not that you're not going to make some special things, that are higher ABV, but it definitely, kind of shifts the whole program a little bit lower. It
absolutely does. And I mean, to that point, I feel like I've been shifting a lot of our ABVs down over the years. Beechwood is known for doing their 7.1 West Coast. At RIP, I really wanted to play in that 6.9 range. And then here at ISM, you'll see a lot of we're brewing West Coast IPAs down in the sixes, low sixes, 6.0, 6.2, 6.5, Western Standard Time, 6.9. But it's definitely all over that 6 range. And I'm really enjoying some of the hop flavor profiles coming through with a little bit less, I mean, it's not body, but a with a little bit less of that extra malt.
Well, that's the thing right now in this contemporary West Coast IPA over the last couple of years, keeping it lean, and tight. I guess we should also mention that when you took over this location and launched ISM here, you also kept Gene, who was Gene, who you trained as a brewer under you then in the early days and when you were here at Beechwood, then ended up staying and leaving Beechwood, becoming an ISM.
We joke he came with the brew house.
It's funny. It's amazing. It's kind of wild.
But it is. I know I'm super happy and more than lucky to get to work with Gene again. He's brilliant. He's got a great mind for beer. He understands flavor profiles. He understands, recipe and beer creation. And then he's intimately linked with the 10-barrel premier system that we have in here.
Knows it like the back of his hand. That's awesome. Well, I want to talk about, brewing West Coast IPA, because obviously it's something you're passionate about. And I think it's really interesting to talk about brewing this modern, lean West Coast IPA in this more sessionable, lower sixes, mid sixes, with the intention of being drinkable, the intention of, grabbing all of this hop flavor, but finding that balance and that kind of support despite this very lean and low malt character. I'm going to talk about all that. But first, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. Perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. And RSS Macklin, a family-owned company started by the head of seaming technology from PS Angeles and SME and field service technician for Ball Corp, offers audits and repairs for can seamers and can integrity training. With experience from big breweries, they bring valuable knowledge to craft businesses. They provide solutions for can damage, seam training, and help your facility become self-sufficient without relying on original equipment manufacturers. If you have any questions regarding your machine setup parameters or concerns about your can line, call them at 330-299-8210 or email service@rssmacklin.com. That's RSSMACLIN.com. And if you're a brewery or distillery and planning or interested in adding a brewery or distillery to your existing craft beverage business, visit breweryworkshop.com now and secure your spot in our upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September in Fort Collins, Colorado. Opening or purchasing a brewery or distillery today is rife with challenges, and the things you don't know that you don't know could be the difference between failure and success. Invest in the success of your business with this 4-day intensive filled with panel discussions, small group sessions, technical tours, and more. Learn more at breweryworkshop.com. Right, Ian. So even in your RIP days, you got a lot of experience designing, building new IPAs and playing, across that spectrum of hops. Now at ISM, you have absolute, the buck stops with you, and you've got a great brewing team to also help you make these beers. Talk to me about how you started conceiving of your West Coast IPA program, and and then. What in a broader picture, and then we can kind of hone in on some of the lanes that you guys consistently play in.
Yeah, I would say my time at RIP, the 5.5 years I spent there, really started to help me build what I view as kind of my West Coast IPA profile. Now we've made some changes since then, but that's where it started really clicking for me. One of the first things that really, really clicked and really started inspiring me was having a chance to go to group selection up at Yakima, creating relationships with not only farmers, hop suppliers, but then also having those conversations about a lot selection and lot differentiation, and then being able to see it. I remember there was one year I was low on Mosaic, and I called up Mike Hunsaker at Grains of Wrath, and I had him ship me down some of his Mosaic, and it blew my mind. I mean, I know, here at Beechwood, Julius always did a really good job with selection. The hops we had back then were awesome. But when I had the opportunity to lead the charge, it was it was mind-boggling.
Now you can see the range that was
Yes.
really out there and
Oh, for
available
sure.
to you that you may not have fully conceived until you were rubbing all of those next to each other and experiencing it.
Yep, absolutely. And that opened my eyes to what we could do, in the brewery. So I bring it back to dropping the ABVs lower. I knew I wanted to drop the ABV down a few points, but I also I wanted it lean and mean. So moving from 2 rows into more Pilsner malt bases, one that sticks out for me a lot that we're still using a ton of today, and that was in Western Standard Time, is Pure Idaho Pils from Great Western. Used a lot of Wireman, either Extra Hell or Premium. I've played with just about every Pils malt base out there to see what we like. And at this point in time,
What makes it something you like versus say something that doesn't quite nail it? And it's not like dislike. I mean,
no, it's
some
not.
of
It's
these are
not about
just,
dislike.
these are shades of
They're
difference, right?
Totally, 100%. I really like especially for West Coast IPA. I love a super clean base. The biscuity toasted notes that you might get sometimes from a Pilsner malt base are real pleasant and nice in a Pilsner, but may not be desired, at a higher level or a higher threshold in a West Coast IPA. So I'm looking for a super clean Pils base. It's got to have
low flavor. Then.
very low flavor, lower in color. It's got to have a real nice protein character as well. I think that helps a lot with just the overall build of the beer. Years ago, when there was a lot of discussion about secondary fermentation going on and latent diacetyl, a lot of brewers I know, myself included, started pulling carapils out, especially on West Coast IPAs, anything that's going to get a large dry hop dose. And so in place of carapils, I started going in with about a bag. It's about 8% of the total grist, white wheat. I'm just using something simple like raw white wheat or superior white wheat for a little bit more body. It doesn't really add to flavor or color so much, but I really like it for a little bit of that body build.
Probably some head
retention for sure. Beyond that, with all the advanced hop products that are out there now, I leaned into Incog really hard. The 702 or the Dyna Boost now is a great product, and I feel that the utilization of those products at the tail end of Whirlpool, or even I know a lot of brewers who are utilizing them in kind of the North Park manner and going directly into the fermenter at Knockout. I think that those hop resins, those kind of higher oils, do give way and do add to body as well, right? There's like a hop resin oil saturation that I feel I pick up on, and that continues to round out's not the good word, continues to add to body.
That's interesting. And so if I'm following correctly, if you were using a more like a pellet based hop, that do you think that green matter in the pellet is pulling some of that back out after it drops some of flavor, and that the advanced hop products are better at just leaving that in? Or
no, I don't think it's one or the other.
Okay.
I mean, all of those oil fractions and compounds are going to be found in green matter hops, right? In T90s or in cryos. In a Dyna Boost or an Incognito, flowable advanced product, you just have more concentrated, a better concentrated amount, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess it could maybe be a little bit easier to get all of that into suspension in a liquid since it's already in its kind of flowable form. And versus the kind of extraction process with
and I'm sure somebody's going to write me an email and tell me I'm wrong. It's okay.
Listen, we're not about wrong or right. We're about opinions and and perspectives, and you honestly tell us yours, and everyone else can figure things out.
There's another part of it that I feel I've been working on for a long time, and Brendan Goff and I have this kind of ongoing conversation about water chemistry and about individual.
That's from Liquid Gravity.
Yes, from Liquid Gravity, and individual preferences on water chemistry and how it comes through in your final beer. There's a lot of West Coast IPAs out there, a lot of IPA brewers who are either starting with a base water that is higher in chlorides, or they're adding a significant amount of calcium chloride to either hit their calcium numbers, or they like that flavor. Those are the softer end of West Coast IPA for me. I think a lot of times the higher chloride to sulfate ratios end up being flabbier beers. I call them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're rounder beers. They're softer. Whereas we're starting with our base water. We're not really adding a whole lot more chloride to it. I think I want to say we're like 70 ppms just in our base through our carbon block. But we're adding a significant amount of gypsum in order to bring up those sulfate levels. And I believe that with that paired with our bittering additions, really drives a clean, concise bitterness. I joke, and you've listened to me on other podcasts. I've joked about it. I've called it assassin level bitterness for a long time, where it's this, I want the bitterness to get in and get out really quick. It's sharp. It hits you and it cleans up, and then it gives way for more of those fruitier top notes.
Interesting. So you don't even know how it got there, and then it disappears just as quickly.
Right.
But it was just enough to.
I mean, we've all had those beers that linger, right?
Sure.
I mean, during the days of the IBU wars, just these beers that sat on your tongue and your teeth, and they were intensely bitter, tannic,
Gritty.
over-extracted, gritty. Yeah. And I love bitterness. I love it, but I don't want it to hang around.
And so you think that the water approach by pumping that sulfate level up is the part of the thing that
I think it's part of it. I'm not saying it's not an end all be all by any means, but being connected to your water source, being connected to what your beer tastes like. To me, it's not important what my IBU number is or my theoretical IBUs are on my recipe, right? I don't pay attention to that. That's an internal number that we might use to determine or to communicate internally about where we want a beer to land. But if I was to tell you, Jamie, this is 60 IBUs, you're not going to be like, I can taste it. No, it tastes more like 75, right? It's just, that's not a natural, normal conversation that we're having. And what tastes like 60 IBUs to me might taste different to you. What I have input in my Beersmith at 60 IBUs, if you input the same recipe and you got some old Pro Mash, it might show off differently. It might show lower or higher depending on what ratio they're using in the calculations. So unless you've got a mass spec that tests IBUs, unless you've got an expensive piece of equipment to tell you exactly where you're at, I think we're all full of shit.
Or at least we're, I guess if you're consistently using the same measure, you can at least set an internal benchmark for what that feels like
and tastes
in
like
your own process. And you can triangulate with the sensory that you're doing on the back end and also see how that hits, And so as long as it allows you that kind of internal benchmark to get where you want to go, I think you're right. It becomes harder if you're trying to benchmark, something on a menu versus someone else's 60 IBUs. Sure. Like it almost becomes meaningless at that point. But there is something interesting, and I like what you say. I was talking to a cider maker a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and she was telling me about how she was using bodybuilding techniques in cider to make people to have a perfectly dry cider that drank like it was sweeter, and that extra sweet, that perception of sweetness, even though it was a completely dry cider, that perception of sweetness highlights that kind of fruit character. And I think that's the interesting thing here. If you can get that kind of laser sharpness to it that makes it, so it has this bitterness, even though it doesn't feel like it has that, then, then that becomes that subtle trick that, creates that structure, creates that kind of punch to it. But then also, now, you're that shock of bitterness prepares you and then pulls right back and allows those fruit characters to come through. But it's then still finishes dry because you also still need people to take another sip, finish that glass, and then buy another one.
100%. Yeah. So in Western Standard Time, when I started to think about putting that recipe together, the first hop that I knew I wanted to use is Columbus Cryo. And for anybody who knows me,
Team Columbus Cryo.
For anybody who knows me, I've been Team Columbus Cryo for a long time. I mean, at least a number of years. I remember getting a call from Kelly with YCH years ago, and she's like, "You want to try this new product?" I said, "Yeah, I'll give it a go." And she's like, "Well, it's $17 for a cryo product." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll send it." But I absolutely fell in love with it. And almost every time I do a collaboration with my buddies, almost without fail, we're adding Columbus Cryo to it. And what I love about it is it's intense. It's dank without being that OG dank. But again, it's like a bottom note. It's like the bass in a band, right? You may not always hear the bass or recognize the bass as the bass, but it's there, and it kind of just keeps things going.
Is it a booming bass note, or is it that kind of like mid, chugging, kind of bass note there?
I would say it's consistent.
Yeah,
it can be booming depending on how you're utilizing it, but for me, it's foundational. It's always there. It's ever present, and you may not pick it out as being what it is, but it's a huge support to a lot of the top note hops.
That's interesting, and I think I love thinking about how these things all work together, because now you've got this in a cryo form that's still not meant to be the star of the show, but it does help bring out some of the better characters and some of the other things that you blend with it. How much, in a typical recipe, would you pump up Columbus Cryo to kind of be that support?
For me, it's not a huge amount. In a 10 barrel batch, we're utilizing generally about a half a pound per barrel.
Okay.
So half a bag, or half an 11-pound bag. And I really love it. Active fermentation dry hop. Use it about 4 to 5 days into fermentation. So you're just on the tail end of fermentation, but it's going to really kind of incorporate itself, and then again, set that foundation for your dry hop, which is coming in just a few days later.
Well, I want to dig into this a little bit more and understand, because now you've opened the active fermentation can of worms, and we gotta talk about a lot of things. But and maybe we'll, even with Western Standard Time, kind of walk back to the start, talk about any you mentioned White Wheat's part of this West Coast program, and you mentioned your Great Western Pilsner malt. I'm curious if there are any mash things that you do again, or in order to kind of keep that body in exactly the place you want it to support it, and then we can kind of get through the fermentation,
cool.
Hot side hops. We'll kind of linearly walk through it. Before we do that, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorient, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroirs, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling. Thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. You're a big fan of indie hops, aren't you, Ian?
I am a big fan of indie hops, yes. And, I'm a big fan of them. Again, it goes back to just being in Oregon and doing selection. Jim and Matt have been nothing but gracious to me. They're really good buddies of mine, and they're super supportive, and they make phenomenal hops.
Well, you heard it from Ian. Also, Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low, even with large hop additions. Tropics strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off your first order. And if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling Podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Hosted by Sydney Jones from, I guess she's now at Heaven Hill in Bardstown, Kentucky, and Molly Troop, master distiller for Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon. This podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes and give it a listen. Alrighty, and let's walk back through Western Standard Time since we're here and we can talk about it. And as much as we try, brewers love listening to brewers about how they make gold medal winning West Coast IPAs from World Beer Cup. Crazy why people would want to listen to that kind of thing. So let's go back to the kind of start. You talked about water, and I don't think we need to talk about that as much. But do you do anything special in the mash? Obviously, you're in a pretty tight pub style 10-barrel system here. It's not like you have a whole bunch of tools at your disposal.
No decoction going on. It's a pretty straightforward single infusion mash. Trying to go in relatively low. 148, 149.
All right. You want to get it dry?
Just get it dry. Yeah, for sure. Nothing too crazy insane about mash. It's a pretty straightforward process.
Yeah. And then, how does the rest of the hot side feel? All right.
So the rest of the hot side, pretty straightforward. Keep the bittering hops in there. You got to have bittering hops.
Yeah. How do you add bittering hops?
So we
top of the boil, first wort.
We've switched recently. We're a 60-minute house. We had a 90-minute boil, 60-minute bittering. We've switched over from
60 and not 90 then.
It's a 90-minute boil. 30 minutes.
But you don't put them in at 90. No, you wait 30 just to
30 minutes in at 60. We're adding them.
All right. It feels like splitting hairs there. What's the difference?
It is. I don't know. It's just what we do.
All right, cool.
And then I used to use a lot of Warrior. We used a ton of Warrior at RIP. When I joined RIP, I inherited thousands of pounds of Warrior. I was the Warrior house for a lot of Southern California breweries. Recently, we switched over. We're currently using Steiner Helio Flow. So it's our whatever their flowable is called. It's the Helios version. I love it for just its super simple, clean bitterness, low cohumulone, super easy to dose and very easy to use. Targeting, I'm going to say it. We're targeting about 35 to 40 BUs. Those are my BUs. Those may not be your BUs. There's kettle additions as well. Simcoe 30, 15, and then it's a blend of Simcoe and Mosaic at about a pound per barrel total at knockout.
Hot side Simcoe. All right.
Yep.
30 minutes of wow.
I mean, I think this goes back. This is from my Beechwood days.
It's not just all Whirlpool.
No, I mean, it really is. I want to build a complex beer, right? I want my IPAs to not only be flavorful and bright, but they also need to have complexity and depth. And I think that's how we get those on the hot side. Now, my Whirlpool edition, it's 1 pound per barrel. It's a mix of Mosaic and Simcoe. That is cool pooled. So we're bringing that down to about 180. We'll do a 25-minute in our pub system. We have to do a 25-minute kind of recirc through the heat X in order to get that temperature down. Depending on how many hops we use before we get to the Whirlpool, we may do a additional 5-minute mini Whirlpool just to kind of tighten that pile up and get them out of the way. So that way we're not clogging up our heat exchanger.
Okay. So you then drop it down, add your Whirlpool hops, and this is now that you've built some baseline for flavor and gotten some of that kind of cooked hop character. Now you're just pumping aroma in there.
Exactly. So when I started conceptualizing the idea of Western Standard Time, and I knew it was going to be our first West Coast IPA, kind of the out the gate West Coast IPA that I wanted to show off. I had no idea at that point it was going to become a medal winner and then potentially some sort of flagship beer. But I wanted to show off the hops that I thought were the sexy ones. So of course I wanted to include Columbus Cryo. We're utilizing that at about a 0.5 pound per barrel active fermentation dry hop. And then following up with Simcoe T90s, Strata T90s, Mosaic T90s, and Mosaic Cryo.
So tell me about this. So fermentation wise, are you using just a pretty standard Chico West Coast ale strain? Or
we are using a pretty standard Chico West Coast strain, except our house strain is the Berkeley D-Free Chico.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with Berkeley for quite a long time.
You're hitting all of our sponsors here, and I didn't even know this. We're just nailing it. Okay.
Yeah, I've been working with Berkeley for quite a long time. Sure. Love those guys up there. Their D-Free Chico. Yeah. I think it's a clean, it's a great yeast strain. Easy to use, super clean. Fermentation, attenuation is all consistent. I think it makes great beers.
And in this scenario with a small pub system, I mean, you've got to, and only a few tanks,
Right.
you
got to be able to crank.
You got to be able to crank. Exactly.
And crank and then trust.
Yeah.
I mean, given the hop loads that we're adding, we're talking not crazy. We're only in the 3.5 to 4 pound per barrel range. But I want to know that we have a consistent product coming out.
Sure.
And clean.
So why active dry hop in the tail end of that fermentation with this D-free Chico?
It's something I've been doing since RIP. It's a flavor profile that I really love. Again, utilizing it in active fermentation, you're not getting. I don't feel like we're getting as many of the high notes out of Columbus Cryo. It's part of building that foundation. It's part of building, like laying down that base. So that way there's something for, big, bright, poppy, blueberry mosaic to shine upon, for Strata to kind of unleash its inner pineapple, Simcoe to get nice and tangerine, fruity, on top of this great dynamic foundation.
So you think that it definitely heightens that intensity and experience of those fruit characters in the hops?
I absolutely do.
But then you also dry hop again after fermentation?
We do, yeah. So that's when everything else goes in. So it depends on what our dry hop load looks like. Sometimes we'll pick 2 of the hops and we'll kind of get them in that day 8, day 9, and then drop them out by day 11 and go with a second round. Sometimes everything goes in all at once. So it's not always the same because we are a pub, because we are constantly playing and constantly evolving. Our processes in the cellar do tend to vary.
I'm interested. You mentioned earlier selecting for specific characters and then seeing this kind of range in it. Are there, amongst those and but having said that, like even within these hops, how things perform, because you're using some of these same hops on the hot side and now on the dry hop side, right. Like, do you see different expressions of those based on how they're used? Do you try to select for something that's going to work in both areas? How does that work?
Given my current selection abilities,
sure, and you're still small amounts.
We're still a very small brewer. Really only doing about probably right now we're doing about 1,500 to 1,700 barrels per year. I think we can max out this pub system around 2,200. If we cut out some of our lagers and just really focus on ales, not saying we want to do that, but I think that's a possibility.
Yeah.
We're still a relatively small brewery. We don't hit the traditional minimums for selection.
Right.
But, kind of as we discussed yesterday, and as I tell so many of my brewer friends, getting to Yakima and being a part of the conversation that's going on in Yakima or in Oregon or in Idaho, or, anywhere hops are being grown, getting there and being part of that conversation is going to open the door to a continuing conversation. I guess, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I say continuing conversation because when I go to selection for my Citra Mosaic or Simcoe, I know I'm only going to pick up, 1,200 pounds of each for the entire year. But being there and being able to see what a early harvest mosaic versus mid versus late harvest mosaic, what those characteristics are, now I know how I can have those conversations with other brewer friends. And so maybe this coming year, I might choose something that's like a late harvest Simcoe that has a little bit more of that ripe tangerine, slightly catty, and then have a buddy of mine who loves this early harvest Simcoe that's like super bright sumo orange or whatever it is. Now we can have a conversation about the 2 different lots and play off and maybe even swap lots going forward. So I think being a part of the conversation, getting yourself to those regions, participating in a selection doesn't necessarily lock you into whatever you choose, right? I'm committed, yes, contractually to whatever I commit to. But it opens the conversation versus if you order spot, you get whatever that factory worker, that warehouse worker on Monday morning picks, whatever's in front of his face, he's going to pull that box, he or she, put it on a cart, and that's coming to you without regard for what that lot number is, the harvest windows. Is it the kind of Citra that you like? You don't know. It's what you get.
See, your collab whore thing comes in handy here too, because as you brew with brewer friends, you get some insight into the lots that they have, and now and if you try and have something that you enjoyed from them too, then that's something you can go back to that hop vendor and ask for and have some more guidance on, and there's some benefit in that process.
And that's part of it too. I mean, I was just up at Ghost Town just last week brewing with them, and there's certain farms that they want to get their Citra or their Mosaic or whatever it may be from, because they've got established relationships. They really like the pick windows. They like the farmers. They trust the process, and year after year, it's consistent. So I know that now. So I'm armed with that information. So when I go to my hop supplier, I can say, hey, could you try to get a lot of Citra or a lot of Mosaic from this grower on my table? And they might say no. They might say, I'm sorry, you can't do that. But at least I know to ask.
Right. No, that's cool. So back to talking about Western Standard Time. How did you land on this blend that you did, and what do you think each of those kind of hops brings into this equation? And is there anything else that you're doing there to kind of highlight, as you say, the kind of assassin character of this, where it hits quickly with bitterness, pulls back, structuring that? Obviously, as you say, water, plays a piece in that, so that it doesn't get flabby, but is there anything else that you think about in terms of, whether that's contact time or temperature or anything else in that kind of dry hop process that helps kind of further that speedy hit and disappearance?
No, I mean, our contact times are definitely longer than a lot of my buddies. A lot of my friends are, they're doing 48-hour contacts and then dropping out. We're somewhere in the 72 to even, so 3 days to 5 days, sometimes 6 days. Now we'll start dropping the bottom of the cone, but without dropping everything out completely. So there is longer contact time there. I think part of it is just my training and what I've done for so many years. I've played around with different contact times. I've played around with different dry hop temperatures. Currently, we're dry hopping between 59 and 60 Fahrenheit. And
so a little bit cooler than normal, but not cold.
No, not cold at all. And then, slowly step crashing that after that to drop everything out. No, I mean, I wish I had some secret that would be like, this is what you need to do to make world-class West Coast IPA. But I think that the truth of the matter is we've been chasing this for a long time, and I couldn't be more happy that we finally hit.
What do you think sets Western Standard Time apart, or in the eyes of judges this year at the World Beer Cup?
What I love about it,
you got a lot of buddies that you're competing with, and and thankfully you all have good-natured competition in all of this. And there's a lot of great beers out there. I'm just curious what you think it was, especially this year, that set yours up.
I think it's hop complexity. I think anytime you're brewing a beer, or especially a beer for competition, you got to be able to get past the appearance first of all, right? You got a beer in West Coast IPA. If it's not clear, it's probably not going to move forward. Right? It's not even going to get to the aroma.
Right.
And then secondly, if it gets past the appearance, it passes the appearance test. It's got to pass the nose test, right? It's got to be bright and poppy and punchy. And so you need to have some real nice high top notes, fruity hops, but also dankness. Dankness is, I think, super key. It can't be all high notes.
Yeah.
There's really got to be we're talking about the base over and over again, but it's got to be complexity of flavor.
Sure.
And I think complexity of aroma is important as well.
Yeah.
And then
it feels like there's this big dynamic range to it where, as you say, it's that full spectrum, piece of it, that it's hitting on each part of this spectrum.
I remember the first time I brewed with Strata, and I was blown away by it. And what I loved about it was we kept it super simple. It was a Strata Mosaic beer, but Strata heavy. And that hop has multiple layers to it where it provides a real nice bottom end dankness while also being super bright and fruity. Like I love the Strata that comes in pineapple.
Yeah.
Right. And so to have a single hop that does both those things at the same time blew my mind. Mosaic is beautiful and it can be dank and it can also be blueberry and punchy, but blueberry can be a flavor that rides that dankness a little bit. It's never really like this. I mean, it is, but you can get tropical Mosaic,
right?
Blueberry Mosaic, dank Mosaic, but you don't ever really see all three of those on that spectrum at the same time. Does that make sense?
Sure.
But Strata for me was that. And so I guess approaching the build out of this beer, that's what I wanted to build. I wanted to build that complexity into a super clean West Coast IPA. And so that's where I started with the Columbus Cryo and then threw in all the hops that I really loved. And all of these hops, I was lucky enough to, through my relationships I built, to go to selection up in Yakima and in Oregon prior to even opening our doors here. So they were hops that I already had a bit of a relationship with and really just wanted to see how they perform.
Sure. Well, you mentioned earlier that, coming at it from a pub perspective, you don't want to have 6 of the same beers on tap all at the same time. You want to keep things interesting and diverse. And so you still have a number of different West Coast IPAs that are not Western Standard Time.
We do, yeah.
And, and so you push into different kinds of hop lanes with those. Do you maintain a kind of more consistent, grist just out of efficiency for those, or do any of those change from time to time?
Yeah, I mean, we're not siloed here.
Yeah.
So we're not committed to one grist in particular, but we do stay within a pretty narrow lane.
Yeah.
American Pilsner malts, European Pilsner malts. Generally, if we're utilizing 2-row, it's as a percentage of the grist. That white wheat stays pretty consistent for us.
Yeah.
And
what might cause you to blend some 2-row into it?
It would just, for me, it would depend on the beer.
Okay.
At this point in time,
is it a specific hop that you might use, or you're like, I think this could probably use a little more, or withstand some more, malt character in it?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversations going on amongst brewers.
Sure.
My brewers included, and sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out if that's something that we used to do, and do we do it again? Like,
right?
Did we stray too far away from 2-row?
You're constantly testing your new assumptions. And,
totally.
And so you have a theory, and then you create a counter argument potentially just to test it.
My theory, I've had this kind of idea, this philosophy about the evolution of beer, and I feel like I'm always trying somebody else's beer. Like I'll try a beer from Evan over at Green Cheek, and I'm like, holy crap, how does he do that? And then I want to bring that into a certain beer that I have here at ISM. And for me, it's a matter of throwing ideas at the wall and just seeing what sticks. And because we're a small brewery, and we can brew so many batches over and over again to test. Yeah, we're always constantly evolving. One thing that I started at RIP that you'll probably hear on podcasts, if you go back and listen to previous podcasts, is we started a thing called the Pint of Pleasure. And I don't know if Danny's still doing this or not, but the idea was as a brewer, you spent the last 2, 3, 4, sometimes 6 weeks working on this beer. Whether it turns out shit or it turns out amazing, you've invested time, energy, the brewer's invested money. You've committed to this beer, to this 10 barrels, 20 barrels, 30 barrels, whatever it is. And when that beer hits the draft system, pour yourself a pint and just enjoy it. Don't critique it. Don't criticize it. Don't kick yourself in the butt for missing a dry hop or for whatever it is. Just enjoy it. Like, have a pint of pleasure. And then every pint after that, completely shredded to bits. What's wrong with it? What are the flaws? How can you make it better? And then let's have a conversation about that, and let's take the next batch and evolve it that much more. You mentioned earlier I had a lot of success with winning awards at RIP, and Black the Ripper is a great example of that. I knew leaving Beechwood, I loved Black IPA. We had success with Black IPA here. It's a favorite style of mine, and so I knew I wanted to brew one for competition when I got to RIP. I remember that first year I had just started with these guys. I said, I want to brew a Black IPA. They said, it's not a good idea. It's not going to sell.
Sure.
I did it anyways. And this was before the window for entries to GABF. So I got it on tap, poured myself a pint. I didn't have the pint of pleasure. I completely shredded it. Not that I hated it. It was a great beer, but I knew I could make it better. So I immediately brewed a second batch.
Double down.
And the guys are like, what did we do? Why did we hire him? He's brewing 20 barrels of Black IPA. But luckily that year we caught a silver with it at GABF. And that beer went on to become the number one award-winning beer for RIP during my tenure there. We won 4 GABF medals out of 5 years. So awesome. The point is evolution. We changed that beer every single time we brewed it. Whether it was changing the base malt or changing the darker malts that went into it or playing with the dry hop profile, it was always about leveling that beer up to the next level. And there were some batches that, I remember what I would have loved about it is I'd go in the morning, and if I tasted through some of my beers on tap and I had an IPA or anything hoppy before I got to Black IPA, I would kick myself and I'd be like, man, we missed it. We totally missed it. It's not hoppy enough. It's too malty. It's too much roast. It's too much robust malt and robust roast character. We're screwed. But then other mornings I go in. You messed up
your context.
Yeah, but then other mornings I go in and I would have it after, I don't know, a Pilsner or a Red Ale, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, these hops are they're popping. They're there. It's awesome. Maybe I need to bring the roast up a little bit. And so it was this constant back and forth. And I found the batches that I loved the most were those kind of batches where I would constantly kick myself and I would say, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. And so for me, that's my brewery culture. It's constant, it's constant evolution. It's constant innovation. We've got to be questioning and not resting on our laurels.
I've had the similar conversation with Hutch and Jonathan from Cannonball Creek, and they, of course, have a long history of medal winning, and of course that creates its own pressure, and now you feel like you have to live up to the expectation that you created, and it can be, for some brewers, like you hit it and you don't want to change it, you want to keep doing the thing because it's been successful for you, and it's really hard to go back and say, hey. But they did that one year with their pale ale and completely ground up, redesigned that same beer they'd won gold medal for the year before, won a medal before, and came back and with the new revised recipe also won a medal.
I think it's
that's crazy.
It's about trust the process. I know it's a cliche leadership or management mentality, but trust the process. I guess we've been doing this for a long time. And trust your instincts. Go with your gut.
So are there parameters then that you would change and others that you wouldn't change? Or is it just, or what would your creative process look like, with the other folks on the team, as you're thinking about, because you've got your own inputs, but I imagine you're also trying to pull, the feedback from all the people, other folks at the brewery to make sure that you've got some confirmation or some,
for sure.
Just, having a bigger pool of data to, to pull from on that. What does that process of rethinking look like?
It's an interesting question.
It's secretly a business podcast wrapped into a brewing podcast.
It really, so it starts with the most simple, non-subjective terms. Do we like this beer?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just got to be, do we like this? And if we do, what do we like about it? right? Do we like...
Maybe it's do we like this now, right?
Right, exactly.
Because you could like something a year ago when you entered, and then your context is also shifting because all the other inputs that you're getting, again, you go down and have a beer from Evan and Green Cheek, and it's like, oh shit, now all of a sudden your context is a little bit different. You're like, well, we could do this, or, so your own context is constantly changing too.
Yeah, and you're right. It is. I guess when I'm looking at my hand, like a glass in my hand, do I like this beer in my hand right now? Knowing that maybe in 2 weeks, with settling, there'll be some changes in that beer as well. So taking those thoughts as well. But do I like this? And if I do like it, what do I like about it in this moment? Do I like the aroma? Do I like the bitterness? Is it too bitter? Is it not bitter enough? Do I like the hop character and the way that the hops are coming through? Do I is it too much? Like one hop I absolutely love, but is so dominant, no matter how you use it, is HPC 586, which I heard recently they're giving a name. I was under the assumption and the belief, and I've been told that they were never going to name that due to its poor agronomics.
That's what I'd heard.
But I'm kind of excited. I hope they have a good name for it. But 586, it's just no matter how we use it, no matter in what quantities or what ratios, it's such a dominant, intense hop.
Yeah.
And so that's a great example of when I ask myself, do we need to back the 586 down to let something else shine through? Maybe Citra, which I love our Citra, but it tends to be a little bit more delicate. It can get steamrolled pretty fast. So what are the components of this beer that I really want to have shine through? And then how are we going to get from where we're at to that next level? Yeah.
One big question, obviously, when you're talking about competitions in general, you're not, and this is, you're talking about time and settling brought this to mind. When you enter a West Coast IPA or a hazy IPA into a competition, it is not being judged at the time of bottling.
Yes, absolutely.
It is being judged after it gets sent to the warehouse and held on to and kept refrigerated, and then eventually opened 4 to 6 weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there anything to how you either time or package or even design the hop character of these beers to peak at some point in the future rather than peaking when it's fresh?
With regard to hop character, no, I don't think so. Nothing beyond what we do here in the pub.
Right.
That doesn't change. But with regard to packaging, I mean, let's be honest, GABF and World Beer Cup and any other competition where your beer's going to be sitting around for 6 weeks, it's no longer a beer competition. It is now a packaging competition. And so how we package beers is very important. And I learned from Julian years ago, and he learned from Pizza Port before that. And, there's this long line of brewers, and we all hand bottle our beers.
Yeah.
None of the beers that we enter in competition ever come off a canning line or ever come off of crowlers. I love the idea of being able to send a full 5-gallon keg. If I was in Colorado, I totally would.
Yeah.
But it's everything's hand bottled.
Okay.
We're talking 2-minute purge times, slow fills, counter pressure, cap on foam. It's a process that it's pretty intense sometimes, and we'll fill 3, 4, 5, 6 extra bottles just to make sure that the ones that we enter are the ones that we feel were packaged in the best possible way.
Yeah.
Then we'll save those other ones. Usually it's about 3, and generally halfway between when we enter and when competition is, we'll open a bottle and we can taste it, kind of judge it ourselves. Do we have high hopes for this beer, or should we focus our hopes somewhere else so we're not going to be crying and sit in 3 more weeks, right?
All right.
And then around the time of judging, now judging's changed too in the last few years, especially since the advent of COVID. Now we're seeing judging starting 2 to 3 weeks early in Boulder at the BA offices. I don't know if it's offices or at the warehouse. And so, hopefully they're doing some of the IPAs and some of the hoppier beers, the beers that are going to fall off faster during those early weeks. And so, so when I get if I
They
get
have
if
to
I
do
get
them there
word
because
Yeah.
you're going to have to go through X number of rounds to get through 350 IPA
Totally.
entries.
So if I get word from a friend, I hear we were judging IPAs today or whatever, I'll go back. We'll go back. We'll sit down.
okay.
We'll judge our own IPAs on that day.
Interesting.
And then do we keep? Are we excited about this? Do we need to write this one off and just kind of move forward? And then if you get feedback, whether your beer was good or bad or whatever,
Right.
then you have usually one more bottle you can taste afterwards. And either you're celebrating with that bottle or you're looking for flaws that you can fix next time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. That's interesting.
The other thing I've been doing for a while, I'm not doing it this year because I'm super excited about how the LA Brewers Guild is doing their shipment this year. Usually guild shipments have to be collected the week prior to the week they're doing in Denver.
Right.
And so I stopped doing guild shipments years ago. And it was after a drunken conversation with Roger at Faction. He's like, well, why don't you just fly them out there yourself?
Yeah.
And so, I started doing that where I'd literally buy a Southwest ticket, rent a car. I'd fly out. We'd package all of our beers. I'd fly out like usually the Wednesday or the Thursday of the week they were due, hand deliver them to the BA warehouse in Lafayette. And what I loved about doing that too is when I was with Rip, the guys who were there were awesome. They knew me. I'd walk in, I'd have shirts, I'd have extra beers, I'd have hats. I'd support them and say thank you for all the hard work and time and dedication you're putting into this. And it was awesome. It was
They're
just
going to unpack and get your beer into cold storage
right?
a little faster than somebody else's. Well, hey,
So
man, that's fun.
For community relationships.
Yeah.
It's what it's always been about for me.
Yeah. I love that. We did a podcast. The guys from the Big Friendly, and they were doing the same thing from Oklahoma City. Flew out to Denver, dropped off, came up to the office, recorded a podcast. We had lunch. They drove back to the Denver airport and flew back to Oklahoma.
And it's a great opportunity too, especially for GABF,
Sure.
to get a collaboration in. And if you can get a collaboration in, maybe even like a lager, that'll be fresh in about 6 to 8 weeks when you're back for the competition.
Yeah. Well, here's my hot tip. We tend to align our magazine deadlines with GABF and World Beer Cup deadlines. So if anyone comes to Colorado to drop theirs off, just come on up to
Swing on by.
We're 40 minutes north of the BA warehouse. Drop off your Craft and Brewing magazine submissions at the same time. It's so efficient that way. All right, I'm going to turn off
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. Ian, as we finish up here, you're 8 months into ISM. Obviously, you've been at this for a long time through a lot of different contexts. You're back here at this place where your brewing career really took off. You're facing new challenges, having to manage not just the brewery but also a kitchen and front of house is something you're familiar with, and you're back into managing that again too. Like you're in this holistic brewery approach. It's also as everyone admits, like kind of an interesting, tough, challenging time for some breweries out there. And obviously you've focused and leaned in on quality and trying to build a name for this brand, build some familiarity amongst people that love beer so that you are known for these things. What do you hope to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years? We won't even talk about long term because you can't even
for
think
sure.
there,
No, I can't even think. I mean,
what's next year? What's 3 years from now?
I'm looking at surviving the winter right now. And I'm not saying I don't mean like doom and gloom. But that's where my mind's at. My mind is at downtown Long Beach is definitely has been through a lot of changes. Is struggling to rebound and come back, as are so many urban centers.
Right.
And so it's not without it's not all butterflies and ponies.
Yeah.
I wish it was.
Winning medals doesn't guarantee economic success.
It doesn't guarantee butts and seats.
Yeah.
And so really for me, the next year is about building our brand within our community. It's about establishing ourselves as a pillar, a gathering space for community members of all shapes, colors, sizes, ethnicities, whatever. It's about being a place where people gather to celebrate and to enjoy life. I want to be a part of the revitalization of downtown Long Beach, and that's really my sole focus right now. I mean, obviously making great beer is a big part of that. Hopefully winning more medals is a big part of that. But giving the community hope and joy is super important to me.
creating that pub and that place for people to come together. Well, I think that is a great place to bring this to a close. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. Take your operations to the next level with the experts at ProBrew. Old Orchard is your go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast Daybreak 5 gives you juicy, modern hop flavors without the haze. Take back control of your canning and seaming with the experts at RSS Macklin. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. Visit breweryworkshop.com for more information about the upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September. And if you're a distiller or curious about it, check out the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast if you've enjoyed this one. And I hope you have, because I really enjoyed it. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, and help support our mission to bring great content to you across this audio channel, as well as our print and digital story channel, as well as our video channel. We're creating content in all of these places. And in fact, I'm going to film a video later today with Julian Schrego right around the corner here. And that will go out to all access subscribers in the next couple months, which is, of course, took advantage of the opportunity being right here to get this conversation in with Ian. Ian, if people want to learn more about ISM, where do they find you? Yeah,
the easiest way is to find us on Instagram at ISM Brewing, at ISM Brewing on Instagram. You can follow us at our website. That's www.ism.beer. Super simple. From our website, you can go to our shop. We'll ship merchandise, glassware, whatever you want nationwide. And if you're in California, we ship beer direct to your doorstep. You can order it from our website. We ship it overnight, so it arrives sometimes cold.
Impressive. Fantastic beers here. And if you're in the Long Beach area or in the LA area in general, pop on down here, hop into the brewery, have some food, drink some Western Standard Time, try the rest of the amazing West Coast IPAs, and enjoy yourself. Ian, thanks for sharing your thoughts and approach on brewing. Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.